democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. We are in this together. Yeah. We are in this together.
Hi everyone, I'm April D'Amato and host of the show In This Together. My show is dedicated to presenting how awakened people and activism come together to support our community, our country, our planet, to make change happen, and give you a voice on how you can participate too. In today's show, we will be discussing mental illness, a subject that is not often talked about openly and continues to have a lot of stigma around it. In the last several months, the term mental illness has been thrown around by mainstream media and politicians, ranging from cuts to state and federal programs supporting those affected by it to discussions around violence. I feel the topic of mental illness is one that deserves a broader discussion. There's a lot more information available today being offered to educate and support the public and their families with regard to mental health. We will be talking about the organization National Alliance on Mental Illness, better known as NAMI. NAMI is an established organization with several programs and initiatives to not only support and educate families and individuals touched by mental illness, but to affect change in society's misperceptions about it. My hope is to aid in that change by starting a conversation today. My guests today are Davina Schmidt, NAMI Shoreline's board president, Thomas Burr, NAMI Connecticut's community and affiliate relations manager, and Sarah Suter, NAMI Shoreline's public policy liaison. Welcome and thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for having us, April.
I'd like for each of you to take a moment to tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and why and how you became involved with NAMI.
Shall I go?
Please, I would love for you to start.
Well, again, thank you so much for bringing up this topic. As you say, it's really important, and we're very happy to be here. The question is, how did I get involved with NAMI? And is it NAMI or NAMI? That is the first question.
I use both.
Okay. All right. So
does it depend on the day?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So I'll use NAMI for the time being. I got involved because I was running a support group for parents for about 8 years in Killingworth, where I live. And I realized that during the support group, through a lot of the parents who came, that there was this organization called NAMI that I had never heard of. And having a child with issues, mental issues, I was surprised. And one of the women in the support group told me about it and said, "You got to go to a support group meeting." And so I thought, well, I certainly will, and then the rest is history. I met two people that a lot of people from Guilford know about. They no longer live in Guilford, unfortunately. Dan Proctor and Jean Proctor, and they started our NAMI affiliate in 2012. So it's young. And then they went and moved. And
When you say NAMI affiliate, are you referring to NAMI Shoreline?
yes, sorry.
Thank you.
NAMI Shoreline, I didn't mention that. So I am, as you say, the president of NAMI Shoreline. And that was a big surprise to me when that happened. But you know how those things happen. Suddenly you're the president. And I have a great group with me. So it's a choir. It's not a solo. And and you will be talking to a member of the affiliate soon. So it was through Dan and Jean that I learned all about the programs, went to support groups, went to Family, which we'll be talking about, one of our programs, and also the learning about the young adult connection programs that are out there. There are so many programs. It's hard to, and fortunately we have Tom here to list them because he can probably remember them all. But we are small and we're trying to grow. We have a couple programs happening, events for wellness that are coming up, and I can talk about that later. But anything we come up with as a board that we think would help the community, we strive to go forward and make it happen. So that was the question. How did I get involved with NAMI? So I'm ensconced, obviously.
Yeah,
now.
it sounds like you're a pretty dedicated
Yeah.
member.
So and I really enjoy meeting these people who are struggling and giving them some hope. That's what we're all about.
That's wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you very much, Davina.
You're welcome.
Okay, so how did I get involved?
Yes.
Well, in order to explain how I got involved, we have to go back in time to when my son John was entering his senior year in high school. And up until that point, John was like the all-American kid. He was an honor student. He was a member of the wrestling team. And he was a good-looking kid with a great circle of friends. And his life up until his senior year in high school looked like he was on this, nice trajectory to go out, finish high school, go off to college, get a degree, go out and get a job somewhere and just live the American dream. However, during his senior year, the wheels started to fall off that dream because we started to get notices from the school that John wasn't turning in assignments and he was failing classes and he was not showing up for classes, and soon we got a notice that no parent ever wants to see that he was in danger of not graduating. And we're like, how can he not graduate? He's an honor student. What's going on
What
here?
happened? What changed?
Exactly. So what was happening is John was developing bipolar disorder. And that began what I like to describe as an 8-year-long roller coaster ride of every parent's nightmare.
Yep.
John was in and out of trouble with the criminal justice system. He was drinking and drugging. He was homeless at a few occasions during that 8-year stretch. He was in and out of the emergency room and inpatient psychiatric hospitalization. And he was also suicidal. In fact, he tried to kill himself. I can't even tell you how many times, because frankly I lost track. But 2 of the attempts were at home. The second attempt was right in front of his sisters, who were 3 and 5 years old at the time.
Oh my
And
goodness.
at that point, his mother and I had to make a decision, which no parent should ever have to make. And it's like, John, we love you, but you can't live here. It's just way too much chaos and drama that you're bringing into our household, which is supposed to be, your safe haven, your sanctuary. So the good news was that right around this time, my wife discovered Nami, and she dragged me, kicking and screaming, to my very first support group. And, because I'm a guy and we don't like to ask for directions, we don't like to ask for help. But it was wonderful. I mean, these people that were running the support group were amazing. They're all not only trained support group facilitators, but they're all people with lived experience, people who had been down this road already.
So they knew exactly what you were talking
Exactly, knew exactly what was going to happening in our lives, knew what we could expect, and how we could try to navigate things. And it was just a wonderful experience. We took the family-to-family class, which again we'll talk about in a little bit, and it really helped us out tremendously. Now, if you fast forward through the 8 years, John is now doing fantastic. He's fully in his recovery. He's been clean and sober. He just got his 10-year coin from AA, so he's off substances for 10 years, a whole decade now. He's got he's got his own home that he bought with his own money. And he got married about 4 or 5 years ago to a wonderful young lady. 2 years ago, they had their first child, my first granddaughter, little Sophia. I can show you pictures later if you want to see them, April.
Of course.
And his life has regained this trajectory it had been on before he got sick. And, I tell his story at every opportunity, anytime I'm, working to spread the word about Nami, because of a couple of reasons. One is, it illustrates that people can and do recover from serious mental illness. I mean, no one was sicker than John was. There were many times during that 8-year stretch where if the phone rang after 10 o'clock at night, I was convinced it was the police calling us up to come down and identify the body. But he made it through all that. He's doing fantastic now, which is not unusual. A lot of people are able to do that with the right support and the right help. But the other reason, other than just letting people know that there is hope, is the stigma. People don't like to talk about this stuff, which is one of the reasons we're thrilled that you have us here tonight. But, we can't say our stories enough. These illnesses are very, very common.
And they're really real in everyone's lives, and yet I feel that a lot of people pretend it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You know,
So-
and that's one of the reasons I wanted to make sure this was out there.
And we're glad you're doing it.
So anyway, just to wrap up how I got involved with NAMI, you know, I started going to the support groups, took the classes, and next thing I know, I'm a member, and then I'm being asked to be a member of the board of the Manchester affiliate, and then the next thing I know, you know, okay, board
is
member,
it?
officer, and then I got involved in the public policy side of things, because at the time I was working as a real estate agent, and I was always going through housing that was vacant, and yet I couldn't get my son in any kind of supportive housing. There wasn't enough of it available. So there became an opening at the state office for someone on the public policy staff, which morphed into a communications job, which then morphed into the current position, which is the community affiliate relations manager.
Thank you, April, for having us, and thank you to all of you for listening. And so I am Sarah, and what got me into NAMI is a social worker that my family had. We have a loved one with a severe mental illness, and it took me about a year to get myself in touch with NAMI and to get in touch with, you know, how to get there. And it was Dan that I talked with on the phone.
Interesting.
Yes, Dan Proctor. And after I talked with him, I felt a lot better about going. And then it's just really been such a wonderful fit. I really feel like it's not only helped me, but it's helped my, you know, entire family, you know, our loved one. And I think that I took the family and family course also. And I've taken Davina's collaborative problem solving course, which is amazing and really helped communication throughout our family.
Yeah, you were a great student, I'll
Yeah,
tell
well,
you.
thank you. I did. I must admit, I took it twice. For those of you who are listening, 2 times, because you have to practice.
It's true.
Doesn't come easily.
Communication is not easy.
Exactly, exactly. But it really is a place, these support group meetings, which we'll be talking about scheduling and all, but Davina and I lead a support group and in Guilford, one support group in Guilford. And anyway, what I was going to say about that is that it's just a really fun place. I found it to be very welcoming, very warm. I could share what I needed to share. We also have fun there. We laugh, and you know, also it's serious. And just to underline everything else that's said up until this point.
You're right about support, though.
Right,
It's so
right.
important.
Yep.
Right, and actually NAMI does have quite a bit of, I don't know whether I would say clout, maybe clout with the state in that we,
Oh, yeah.
people are listening to us now, and so the
You have a louder voice.
the public, right, the public policy, I get to, you know, be a part of really listening to these people that are really devoting a lot of time. This is all volunteer. And I think I brought a little prop here, and this is our NAMI. Oh, NAMI Shoreline, by the way, is an affiliate that involves the shoreline between Brantford and Old Lyme. And we participate in a walk up in Hartford every spring.
Yes.
And if you donate a certain amount of money, is it a heart? If you
Well,
collect, I mean,
yeah.
if you get people to support your walk for $100 or more.
Yes,
Get to
but
have one
this
of these?
particular T-shirt was our NAMI Shoreline T-shirt.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
So, if,
So it says that on the front, NAMI Shoreline, and then on the back, really, this is, I love the hands joining together. I don't know who came up with that, but, and then it's, and
Jean and I.
that really pretty much sums us up. You are not alone.
Right.
yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
Welcome.
sharing your backgrounds and a little bit of what brought you into this and working with this and actually just not volunteering, but actually being a really big part of the organization. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, I talked about the mainstream media having been discussing mental illness in relation to violence, which I believe supports a false preconceived notion that individuals that have been diagnosed with mental illness are violent. I'd really like if we can talk a little bit more about this and what types of disorders and what is mental illness. Some examples, if you could share them. I ask this question because often many people do not truly know or understand. Perhaps it's just because we don't talk about it as a society. We hide a lot of stuff and we're in denial. Because for most of us, it's still taboo, and I think a lot of people are afraid to really share that. Either way, we don't often hear the term used in media unless it's related to something extreme, which to my knowledge, those with mental illness are not more likely to be violent.
You're
So
absolutely right.
Right. Now, people with mental illness are actually statistically more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence. It's a very, very common misperception.
Absolutely.
But before we kind of get too far down into that, you know, you had asked about the different types of mental illness, and they typically can fall into one of two places, either a thought disorder or a mood disorder. You know, mood disorders are typically things like, you know, bipolar disorder, which is actually falling between the two extremes of being, you know, either suicidally depressed on the one hand or completely manic to the point of psychosis on the other, you know, the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. A thought disorder, for example, is schizophrenia, where you have a lot of disordered thinkings and thought processes and just having trouble with the way your brain perceives reality. And those are probably two of the real extreme illnesses that people think of when they talk about mental illness. But some of the more, you know, still common illnesses but maybe don't get quite the attention are things like simple anxiety disorders, social anxiety, phobias can all be lumped into anxiety disorders, you know, OCD, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder.
Depression.
Depression is a huge one.
is PTSD
PTSD
fall
is
into this
also-
category as well?
Yep, absolutely. And PTSD, of course, has gotten a lot of press in the last several years, mainly because of all the service men and women coming back from the Middle East that have, you know, been in these war zones and have seen, you know, just awful things and experienced it. But the ironic part about that is that PTSD, from a statistical standpoint, is actually more common in women.
Oh, interesting.
But it got most of the press because of mostly men coming back from the war zones in the Middle East. But it's actually much more common in women.
Well, in medical field in general, I think what tends to happen is there's been a lot of studies on males more so than on females.
Yeah, with
and
the heart disease,
a
same
lot of the
thing.
knowledge
Yeah.
has been about males versus females, so
That's
that
true.
could be why that's gotten more press and more attention.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
that's
exactly.
interesting. So with all these different disorders, that does NAMI actually address all of those in your workshops, your classes?
Well,
How does it work?
Certainly our family-to-family class, they talk about all the different types of mental illnesses, you know, what they typically present as, the symptoms, as well as the behaviors that may be exhibited by someone who's struggling with one of these illnesses. We talk about the medications that can sometimes be brought to bear, how they work, what the side effects are, that sort of thing. And the thing that, you know, and I've taken family twice. I'm like
Me too.
Sarah over here, you know. It took me a couple of times, but you know, it's what I, in addition to just the raw knowledge, what was wonderful about that class was the coping skills. How do you maintain your own sanity when your world's been turned upside down? How do you help your loved one navigate, excuse me, through a meaningful recovery without enabling them? You know, kind of nudging them in the right direction without overcompensating and actually keeping them from entering a meaningful recovery. It's really a bit of a tightrope act, but you know, the class really teaches you how to do that.
It sounds to me like NAMI is really helpful to the parents and the
Oh, yeah.
you know, spouses. Do they do programs also for individuals that have been diagnosed?
Yes.
Oh yes, yeah, we have.
I'm just curious because we've been talking
Yes.
more about family
Yeah.
perspective.
Yes.
Well, NAMI historically was originally created by families. It's very much a grassroots organization. But yes, over time they've certainly expanded into providing not just programs for caregivers, but also for people that are struggling with the illnesses, whether it's support groups, the connection support groups for people in recovery. There's a couple of different flavors of that. There's just the general one that's open to anyone who's in recovery or
May
working
I
on the
interrupt you for a moment?
Sure.
When you say recovery, is that more than addiction recovery? Are you
Oh,
talking?
yeah, no,
And the
it's-
reason I'm saying that is I want to clarify that for my audience, because when you think of recovery, the common response is, oh, addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I want to just clarify that.
Yeah, and you know, certainly as an organization, we tend to focus a little bit more on the mental health side of things because of our name and all that, but it's actually pretty much the rule rather than the exception that people who are working on recovery from a mental health disorder are also working on a substance abuse issue. They're
Exactly.
very, very common.
They
They're
go
co-occurring.
like this.
Yeah, like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Sometimes.
it's like
Yeah,
a
I
way
mean,
of
they're-
Sometimes,
self-medicating.
not always.
Not always, but more often than not, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I would think it's for the perspective of more self-medicating
Oh,
to,
absolutely. yeah.
make their way through life.
Exactly, yep. And so we have the connection support groups. We have a young adult connection support group, which is specifically for young adults 18 to 29. And then there are the veterans connection support groups, which we have at both Newington and West Haven, the two VA
Oh, okay.
centers. So-
And what's the CAN? I noticed
Oh,
it-
that's the Child and Adolescent Network support group.
Okay,
That's for
see.
caregivers of young children who are still in the school system.
Oh, see, Nami does so much.
It
that
sounds really
it's-
encompassing.
It's amazing. So if you call them on the phone or go to the NAMI Connecticut website, you will see all the programs. I mean, here I am president, and I'm asking him, so what's this program? But
Well, does Nami Shoreline have the same programs as
No.
Nami Connecticut?
No.
Or is it just, is that what you were talking about earlier when you said you're trying to grow it?
We are growing. I mean, we will have, you don't know this yet, Sarah, but a family-to-family
Exclusive.
class coming up, hopefully in the spring, because we just have 2 members of our board, which is small. And I'm sorry I cut you off. You may have had more to say, but think of it and cut me off. That 2 members of our board, and our board is only about 7 people, but I'm trying to grow it because the more we have, the more help we get and the more differing points of view.
Right.
It's a good thing. So they will be doing a family-to-family in the spring, the 2 members, and Sarah and I run the support group in Guilford, which is tonight, as a matter of fact. The
Second Tuesday of every month.
Second Tuesday, and then on the 4th Wednesday, we have one in Madison. So those are our main programs right now. I run a collaborative problem-solving class, which is something you hear about in the family-to-family course, which Tom was talking about.
Can you tell us more about what that is?
It's a way.
You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, it's a way to communicate with your loved one and the rest, with everyone actually, but it's basically with the loved one in such a way that they feel safe. You talked about the safety, and they feel calm so that they are able to actually access this part of the brain, which is the thinking part of the brain. Most of these loved ones, children, adults, there are 35 living at home. It runs the gamut of children, loved ones that are in trouble. And they have problems solving things themselves. And it all is based on lack of certain skills, and it varies from person to person. They might be black and white thinkers or whatever. And so through empathy, which is the first part of it, and listening and no judgment, I'm here just to understand, they calm down and you're able to move forward with them.
Is it kind of like meeting them where they're at?
Yeah, they are not sure where they're at. So what you're doing is, by talking in this way, which at first is difficult for some because they've usually said, "Are you kidding me? You were out there smoking pot? I don't think so." And then the whole,
It's like a whole shutdown.
you know what hits the fan, and you are like 2 lizards going at it. And it's better to stay calm, be non-judgmental, and just say, "What's going on? Can you help me understand?" And for the first time in their lives, probably, they're being heard. And it's quite an extraordinary moment when it happens. And what happens is the relationship improves. So that's a very Reader's Digest version of what it's all about.
That's
And
very helpful, though.
it-
It's very helpful for my audience to understand
Yeah.
that perspective.
Yeah.
I should probably finish the
Yes.
conversation about the programs for the people that are in recovery. And that's okay, because that was a great segue.
Oh, good.
We have a couple of other programs that people in recovery can avail themselves of. One's called In Our Own Voice. It is
that's a good
and then typically they'll do that during the family-to-family class, among other venues. But that's where two people who are in recovery, who have been trained to do this 45-minute presentation. It's an interactive presentation where they bring a DVD that has very short segments of video on it that talks about the different stages that people typically will go through in the process of entering a meaningful recovery. And they'll play the video for a few minutes that'll talk about one of those little subsections, one of the steps involved, and then the two individuals will talk specifically about their own experiences dealing with that particular step in their recovery.
Oh.
And it's very powerful.
Sounds very helpful.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it kind of, especially, if you're someone who's kind of new to all this and you don't understand, it's extremely helpful to try to get an understanding of what someone who's going through this whole process is dealing with, because it's really hard to relate to if you've never had one of these illnesses. It took me personally a long time to really understand in my heart what my son was going through. For the longest time, even after I took the family-to-family class, I had an intellectual understanding of it, but I didn't feel it here. And it wasn't until I had a little epiphany that I understood how serious this was and how much he was struggling with it. So,
Do you credit NAMI, like the exposure that you got through NAMI, for understanding more?
oh, absolutely. And in fact, the family-to-family class is an evidence-based training. They actually have done the research where they took two groups of caregivers. One group went through the class, the other did not, and tracked them over time. And the group that did not tended to fall along this similar arc where the loved one who had the illness would end up estranged from the parents. They'd burn the bridge and were just never heard from again. And if it was a married couple, they typically got divorced. It literally, the illness blew the family unit apart.
Wow.
Whereas the people who did take the class had much better outcomes. The person had a better chance of coming through a meaningful recovery, and the couple would stay together.
That's amazing.
And I credit the family-to-family class all the time with my own family situation, because my wife and I at the time were like this, butting heads about what to do about John and how to handle it. And I can't prove it saved his life, but it absolutely saved my marriage.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it, because I can only imagine what it would be like to have that situation where you don't know how to fix what's happening, and then the two of you would react to it all the time, and then it would be a trigger constantly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Like, just a quick, you may have seen it as a meme or something on Facebook, but it's so powerful. My child is not giving me a hard time, he's having a hard time. And that lens change can be miraculous. And that's kind of what happened to you, that epiphany. Whoa, he's not doing this to press my buttons. Yeah.
Well, I liken it, anyone who's got a serious mental health condition, I liken it to someone who's literally drowning.
Exactly.
And they are going to grab whatever straws they can because
Right.
they literally feel they're fighting for their lives. And that often presents itself to the untrained eye as manipulative behavior.
Right.
Right.
But it really isn't. They're literally drowning
It's
and trying to
not.
just
Survival.
save. It's pure survival mode. And when you finally get that, it does change your perspective. And you talk about the shift in perceptions. One of the things that we've learned fairly recently, in just in the last few years, is the whole idea that a lot of the folks who have a mental health condition and are struggling are doing so because of a traumatic experience in their life. It's an illness that's been triggered by trauma, and we're trying to get people to not say, what's wrong with you,
Yes.
but what happened to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, and some of these illnesses, for instance, schizophrenia, are actually genetic illnesses.
Right.
So they
Good
can
point.
be exacerbated by trauma, but they actually are in the person's genes already. And I wanted to say another thing about the In Our Own Voice that's so wonderful and so powerful for me is that's a wonderful experience for the person themselves that they're sharing.
It's an achievement.
Right, it's an
Yeah.
achievement, exactly,
Yeah.
April, because that takes a lot of guts to come before a whole group
Good
of
point.
people and
share your story.
your
Yeah.
most crisis,
Yeah.
part of your individual person. And another thing that NAMI does, I think, so beautifully, and it's something that we at NAMI Shoreline have started with, and I don't know how many, couple of years maybe, is going into the high schools. And,
Yes.
can you talk more about that,
Yeah, that's
Davina?
called, don't tell me. It's called Ending the Silence.
There you go.
Bingo.
Beautiful.
And
Very
that
powerful.
is very powerful as well, because it's very similar to In Our Own Voice, I think.
In some
Because
respects, yeah.
it's
There's a young adult involved, yeah.
a young adult recovering from a mental illness, and an adult, and usually a teacher, I think is the way it runs. And there's a PowerPoint that they go through, and the students in the class for high school, it's usually meant, are learning ways to notice what might be an indicator of someone being in trouble. You know, they're off eating lunch by themselves, so some people are loners. But there are certain kind of triggers or
So is this program for the educators? Is that?
it's for the children in
Oh,
the
it's for the
school.
children in
Yes,
the
sorry.
school, not just the
It
educators.
Yes.
does have a companion piece of it, though. That is
Okay.
for teachers and staff,
That's
which currently
called-
branded Parent and Teachers as Allies,
Yeah.
but starting next year, it's going to be wrapped under the Ending the Silence
Okay,
brand.
the
And-
whole thing.
And how does that get into the school systems? Like, what schools are doing
Yeah.
it? How do
Nami
you get to
How?
volunteers go in with
Volunteers.
Well,
pamphlets
and how welcoming are the schools? to
Well,
this?
you know, that's
It
a
depends.
great question,
It
because
is.
it's a fairly new program. It's only been out for a few years, so it still in some cases is a bit pushing the rope.
Yeah.
We went through a similar arc with the crisis intervention team trainings, where years and years ago, it was really hard to get
Yeah.
law enforcement and first responders to embrace that. Now we have waiting lists, because
Yes.
it finally
Right.
hit critical mass, and they realized, yeah, this is actually really valuable.
And it works.
And it works. So we're kind of going through that same curve with the Ending the Silence and Parent and Teachers as Allies. In fact, before we started, we were talking a little bit about trying to get into my local school system, and just, it's a challenge sometimes, because a lot of times.
Are they receptive, or do you,
It
do you find
varies.
Do you
Some-
find it's the curriculum or the budget, or what do they give you for
It's-
excuses? I guess is what I'm trying to find out.
It's typically what happens is someone in a position of influence will end up finding out about Nami, end up going to a support group, probably taking the family to family, and finally gets it,
It
and
clicks.
realize it clicks for them, and then they advocate internally to get it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we'll eventually get to the point where we'll have a waiting list, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you
'Cause
just
that
try
would be
to
a
knock
great
on,
thing.
yeah, if you just
Oh.
try to knock on the front door and say, hey, you need this, they're like, yeah, talk to the hand, don't tell us how to do our jobs.
Exactly. And I
Exactly.
get that, but that is entrenched in some
Yeah.
schools. And some
Yes.
schools are like, oh, yes, give it to us.
Yeah.
Where can we sign up?
Right.
Certainly the schools that we've been into, and I've been trained as one of the panelists on this, so I've helped
Have you
present
been
it.
anywhere on the shoreline, or no?
I haven't, but I can't speak with authority to exactly where we've been, because I don't run that
Old
program, that's
Saybrook.
someone else.
Old
Okay.
Saybrook.
Old Saybrook,
Old Saybrook,
okay.
and I believe Guilford, Branford High. You're talking about the high schools, going
Yes,
to the high schools?
yes.
Okay.
So Branford High, Guilford High,
So they have done it here in Guilford.
I believe so.
I
And Branford High.
wasn't aware of that. I went to the one in
I
Old
thought that's,
Saybrook.
when we
so
were at Ann's house, we were talking about that. I thought.
I was probably not listening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure you were.
We all
No,
do
I
that, don't
also-
worry.
I also wanted to add a couple things, and that is that NAMI stands for, some of us are always like, what does it stand for again? Well, anyway, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so, as you were saying before, April, it does encompass a whole lot of advocacy issues, awareness issues for people with mental health conditions. I also wanted to point out, if our viewers ever would want to go to one of our support groups, our support groups are in a way, mini family to family.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yes,
Oh, so
because
that's sort of, there's support groups in addition to the educational parts.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
so
Yeah.
these are support groups for.
I just wanted to clarify
Yeah.
that.
Exactly, right. And this is support groups for people with the actual issues. NAMI hosts these support groups for the actual conditions, and also the loved ones, the caretakers.
Caregivers, yeah.
Oh, that's
And-
wonderful.
Oh, right. So if anybody would want to go to one of our support groups, the Guilford Community Center, the Green Center, second Tuesday of the month from 7 to 8:30.
Yeah.
And then in Madison, for the time being at the meeting from the time being
Scranton.
at the Madison Public Library, that's the fourth Wednesday of the month from 7 to 8:30.
Exactly.
And the thing about those are, they're almost like mini family-to-family sessions. I mean, we really, in a way, are teachers. Although we're not teaching, we're letting them teach each other, you know,
Right.
and we're facilitators.
Yeah.
But for instance, very, very important issue, see the individual as themselves, see the person.
Not the illness. Yeah.
Not the illness, right. Very good. I'm glad you brought
So,
that
so
up.
various things like that. You know, what are you going to do for yourself when you leave here?
Yeah.
You know, self-care, so important. What is your, we have principles. What is your, you know, best principle that you're going to take with you tonight? And one of our favorite ones is always be hopeful, or, you know,
Never give
Sense
up
of
hope.
humor.
Yes.
sense of humor, right.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
Sense of humor, all
Yeah.
sorts of various things. I think there are 10 or 12 of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I just,
Sure.
before I forget, I just want to, you mentioned the young adult connection, which is so important, and I want to try and get one in Guilford or in this area. So I'm just putting that out there. There is free training, and what it is a young person in recovery, two together have a support group like what we do for our children, but these are peer support groups, which are so valuable.
So how can they contact you for that?
I would say go to the Nami Shoreline, go to Nami Shoreline website, namishoreline.org, or Nami CT for Connecticut. NamiCT.org has all the programs.
In general, like whenever you're going through anything, having someone who is a peer
Exactly. It's
Right.
telling their story,
It's
sharing their
the
information makes you
per-
feel more comfortable,
Right,
and
vulnerable, and
the
open.
data show how valuable
Exactly.
it is. It's way more, sometimes better than therapy.
Right.
So,
And that is
Right.
another program that we offer. It's the peer mentor program, so that people who are in recovery who do want to give back can be trained on how to be a peer mentor. In fact, that's
That's wonderful.
probably one of the key things that
Oh,
the
it
state
definitely is.
office does is we're the entity that provides the training
Right.
programs for people who want to facilitate a support group, or want to teach a family-to-family class, or want to do an in their own voice presentation. All those programs, you have to be trained. And
Which is great.
The state office is the organization that provides that training, and it's free.
I was just
Right.
going to ask you, so out of all these programs, is there a cost to any of
No.
them?
No, not one.
think
thing.
of that,
all free.
nothing.
That's
No.
wonderful. And so how is it funded, your organization?
Well, that's a great
Dues.
question. It's
Yeah.
been a lot in the, press.
And the
obvious-
walk.
Yeah, there's the dues, which is a very small part. There's our annual walk, which is the third Saturday in May during Mental Illness Awareness Month.
Is that like the biggest fundraising that you've
That's
done?
our biggest fundraiser. We do a lot of other ones. We did the Hartford Marathon this year, which was cool. Yeah, we get some funding from the state, not as much as we used to because the state's broke,
Yeah.
which, we can talk about policy maybe next around all of that. But we're a nonprofit. And
Right.
because of that, certainly if anyone thinks what we do is valuable, we're always happy to take your donations.
Yeah, so please
Right,
donate
right,
to them.
right.
We'll
Yeah,
have information.
NamiCT.org.
Yes.
And I also wanted to mention that I feel, and I'd love to have you to weigh in on this as well, and that is that the more we can educate our young people and really minister to our young people with these mental health issues, the more we can help to erase that stigma, because the
I
young
agree.
people are where it's at. They're going to educate each other. They're going to be the ones, they're the upcoming people who are going to, we're trying at all levels to
Yeah.
erase the stigma, but I think that's where we're going to be the most successful.
I know it's very cliche to say the children are our future, and they're
Yeah.
the ones that
Oh,
will
absolutely.
change everything. Their consciousness
Absolutely.
is much more present than we were,
Right,
because there's
right.
more knowledge out there.
Yeah.
Right, and I also wanted to also make the point that these NAMI support groups, as well as the support for the caretakers, as well as the support for the people themselves with mental health conditions. This is your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, could be your child, your mother, your father, your grandparent. It's for anybody taking care of anyone with a support mental health
That's why we
condition.
use the word loved one,
Yeah.
Right.
because it tends to,
Well, everybody knows somebody.
Right.
I mean, it's
Exactly,
1 in
yeah.
5 people
Yeah.
at any given point in time have one of these conditions.
Oh, right.
And in fact, you know, when we do like an Ending the Silence or Parent and Teachers as Allies, you know, we
Oh,
tell
yeah.
the teachers, it's like, if you've got a classroom of 25
Right,
students,
think of that.
5 of them are struggling
Right.
with something or another. They're on that continuum. You just may not realize it.
Well, you know
Those
what?
are like really good statistics to say.
It is.
That's
1
very
in
Well,
5.
it's
I've
sobering
actually
to
even
say.
read 1 and 3. I
No,
don't like
it's
to be
really
argumentative,
good for our
but I
audience
have
to hear
actually.
that though, because as much as we're talking about it, and we're comfortable, and you're very
unbelievable.
comfortable talking about it, there's people out there that really can't comprehend that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's hard to get your mind around, but you know,
That's
again,
right.
if you think about it, everybody knows somebody. There was an interesting article in Science News that was out just a few months ago, and in fact, I bought a copy of it. I'll give it to you later. But it referenced 5 different studies that have been done, not just in the U.S. but in other countries, and they saw from childhood through really just like the 30s, that anywhere from 65 to 83% of the population at some point in that 3-decade span were dealing with a mental health condition. Now think about that.
Yeah.
You know, up to 83%, that means that it's the exception to be mentally healthy your entire life. You know, almost everyone is going to deal with this
Struggling.
at some point in their life cycle. And in fact, we know from other studies that once you get into the retirement years, there is an uptick in mental health conditions. So it's got to be more weighted to that 80% plus range over the lifespan.
Right.
So there should be no stigma associated with these illnesses
Yeah.
because they are extremely common.
It's really hard to believe there is such stigma still.
I
Right,
agree.
right. And you know,
You know.
the other reason that there shouldn't be any stigma is that the person doesn't sit around thinking, oh, I think I'm going to develop schizophrenia right now,
Yeah.
and go through all of that. No way. It's not something,
one
any
would.
of these mental health conditions aren't anything that someone brings about
Yeah, no
on
one's not
their
choosing
own.
it.
It's not a club
Right.
anyone wants to join.
No.
Right.
Exactly.
And you were
Exactly.
talking
Right.
about children and our future and so forth, and so often we miss the boat. We think, my kids are fine in my classroom. I got 30 kids. There are 5 of them, though, well, actually more, wouldn't it be? I can't do that math.
6.
Six,
That's okay.
6 of them, 6 of them who are, banging their head against the wall or getting in trouble or throwing spitballs, and they think, oh, they're just bad kids. They're just poorly parented. And guess what? All of them have some kind of mental illness when you go
Do you
back.
think that's changing though in the last few years?
I don't
particularly?
know. I don't know. I don't.
When you,
s-
when
I
you
don't know.
say changing, what do you mean specifically?
I'm thinking of teachers now, not teachers from 10, 20 years ago, but now. Are they more observant? Do you think they're seeing more and actually understanding a little more? There's more going on than just bad behavior?
I'd
Not-
like to think so, but honestly,
Some
I
of 'em.
don't know that that's being widely taught
No.
in the
Right.
school systems
not.
yet.
Not yet.
We do presentations to different colleges, but it tends to be more social work,
Exactly.
nursing students, pharmacology students, I can say it, people that are in those fields.
Not teaching fields, huh?
Not as much.
Not
It's
really. I
like-
think I can remember doing one presentation in the last 5 years to a group of teachers.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's actually disappointing.
it
I
is.
unfortunately don't know anybody. I'm a retired teacher myself. I don't know anybody that's going through a teacher curriculum right now, you know, as a student, but I can find out.
Yeah,
But
I'm
also-
curious because I know a handful of people in my life that are teachers and they're much more conscious and aware. And
Good.
my group of people
It's,
tend to be more
and
conscious
it's
and
not
aware.
a
Yes,
blanket
good.
statement.
Yeah.
Certainly,
know.
there are teachers who
So no,
get it.
but because I think of them being
Certainly.
more conscious and aware, I wonder if that is.
Right.
Well,
right.
there's
It's
certainly
not part
much
of the
more
curriculum.
information available now with the internet and everything. I mean, you
Yeah.
can find out anything about anything in 2 clicks.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just, are you going to make the effort to do it?
Right,
Um,
right.
Certainly, I think from general societal awareness, I think that's true as someone who's been
I do too.
in this world for almost 20 years now. I do a thing ever since I started at the state office back in 2011. I do this thing called Mental Health in the Media. And I can remember when I very first started, sometimes it was a struggle to get a half a dozen articles that were current and timely and relevant. Now it's like I've got pages and pages, and I've got to cherry pick the best of the best to try to fit it on a sheet and a half of paper.
Right.
Wow, that's great.
So it's good. There's a lot of information out there, but again, how widely it's being disseminated, how interested are people in reading it is still kind of an
Well,
open
I
question.
also
Right.
think that most schools, if not every school, have social workers, and so those people are savvy and aware.
Not always.
Not all of
Not
them, though.
always.
That I actually
But then
find that I'm not sure that they are.
I know.
Oh.
No,
Oh,
in my
okay.
experience,
Oh,
it's
really?
rare.
Oh,
Indeed,
okay.
they exist.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then they're like the tail wagging the dog of the administration that
Well,
says,
that's sad.
no,
Yeah.
he just went like this toward the teacher and happened to hit him. He's suspended.
Right.
You know,
true.
instead
that's a
of
good point.
talking to
Right,
him.
instead of
Yeah.
collaborative problem
Yeah.
solving.
There's
I
very
also
much a
wanted to-
continuum, in any given school
Yes.
system.
Sure.
Some school systems have warmly embraced what we do, and others are still kind of behind the times. It's
And
just
that-
the
and
way
that's
it is.
just kind of society in general.
It's
Yeah.
right.
With everything.
It's a
And
big-
it's
yeah.
hard for them.
Right.
It's a big ship to turn around. A school is one of the hardest,
Right.
what do you call it, institutions to change.
Right.
So
And
I'd
I
like to-
also wanted to also just say, for people watching, that very often in a child, if we're talking about a child, or even an adult, the behavior that's manifested is a lot of times just being not throwing spitballs, but being very reserved.
Yeah,
what's the
not
word?
no friends, going inside.
Yeah.
Right, I'm trying to think of the word. I'm
Withdrawn.
not getting it.
Withdrawn,
But anyway, very
yeah.
quiet, and so.
Yeah, there are all kinds of ways to.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'd like to
Anyway.
change our topic a little bit more
Okay.
towards advocacy and legislation, because we are coming up to the 2018 legislative session.
Yep.
And so I'm curious as to know if there's anything out there that you're interested in following, if there's any bills out there that your organization's hoping to back and put out there, or if there's anything that you'd like to have more information about.
Right, as I listen to these meetings, there is a huge homeless crisis in Connecticut they're trying to work on. So that's huge. A lot of programs have been cut. I remember reading in the paper a while ago, at least half a year ago, West Haven had a mental health building, I can't think, a mental health center that just got closed.
It's because of
That's
funding?
West Haven
Yeah.
closed because of budget, and so many people were without services, and so as far as what people can do,
Before
to-
about what people can do, I actually want to know, what is the state doing?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
what is the state doing?
yeah.
Because obviously the state is not allocating that many funds to mental
But
health because they're
they've
cutting
brought
out
some
everything.
back. I mean,
and
Yeah.
that's where the advocacy comes in. People need to call them and contact their legislators
Yeah.
and say, this is really important, you need, and so that's why we call it grassroots. You know, like I'm on the internet, I think Davina is too, you probably also, Tom, just always emailing and calling and, yeah.
Well, that's one of the
To say the
things.
least, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things that the state does in a big way, and in fact, all NAMIs do. It's one of the three things. I mean, we're basically an organization that does three things: support in the form of support groups, education in the form of education classes, and we've talked a lot about that already. The last thing is advocacy, and
Yeah.
specifically legislative advocacy. The national headquarters is down in the Washington, D.C. area because that's the capital of the U.S., and typically any of the state NAMIs, and there's a NAMI in every 50 states, they tend to be where the state capital is. In our case, in Connecticut, our office is up in Hartford because we're at the legislative office building in the state capitol all the time. And we have, in fact, I have it right here, our legislative agenda from last year. We're still finalizing our legislative agenda for this coming session in 2018. But typically, we're focused on a core set of things that, does change over time, but has stayed relatively constant because a lot of this stuff just continues to be something that we need to address. Certainly in the current economic situation that the state finds itself in, where the revenues just aren't meeting expectations and yet the expenses keep going up, we're fighting tooth and nail to preserve what we have. I
Yeah.
mean, we were talking earlier before the show about how Mental Health America had ranked the 50 states, and Connecticut's public mental health system was ranked #1. We're trying to keep that, but it's, really tough right now because of the budget cuts. So we're trying to preserve what we have that we know works and works well. We're also trying to advance things where it makes sense and where we think we can. One of the things, and you touched on it, is the homelessness. I mean, Connecticut has actually done a pretty good job compared to other states in supportive housing, and a lot of that is, kudos, love him or hate him, Governor Malloy has always been a very staunch advocate for supportive housing. Even when he was the mayor of Stamford, he was very much a proponent of it, and at least through this last budget, we still have maintained funding for the housing piece of it. There have been some nibbles around some of the...
Can you explain to us what supportive housing is?
Oh,
for our
yeah,
audience,
sure.
So in case people don't know.
Yeah, and I should, because not everyone does know. I mean, it's housing, which could be anything from a standalone single-family house to a single apartment in an apartment complex or a condominium complex or a dedicated building with all the units dedicated to supportive housing. So the actual physical thing could be any kind of thing that
Group
someone could
homes.
live in, group homes, whatever it is. It's also the services that are wrapped around it, and that can be whatever is meaningful to the person who's in recovery. It could
So it's
be
basically somebody's able to live on their own
Yeah.
with supportive services.
right, and it's alone, or sometimes there's staff, depending on the facility. It
Okay.
just depends. But it's services. It could be medication management, Meals on Wheels,
Yeah.
supportive employment, whatever it is that the person needs to, help them in their recovery. The last piece, and this is usually the piece that tends to get cut, is the rental subsidies. Because typically someone who's in recovery is either not working or is just starting to re-engage with the work world and isn't making a lot of money. So there's not enough money to pay the rents, because the rents in Connecticut are
Yes.
way up there. And so supportive housing, and it's a model that works. It actually is extremely cost effective. I mean,
Yeah.
when people don't have housing, not only can they not work on their recovery, but they tend to get tangled up in the criminal justice system. They tend to be cycling in and out of the emergency room or inpatient hospitalization. They're in crisis. Those services, the crisis-based services, are extremely expensive compared to supportive housing, which is relatively inexpensive. And thankfully, again, the governor, as well as the legislature, understands that. And that's because of not just what we do, but a lot of our partners. We're not an island. We have a lot of great coalition partners we work with. The Partnership for Strong Communities, the Reaching Home campaign, Journey Home, the Connecticut Coalition on Homelessness. All these organizations
That's
that
great.
are working to help push for more supportive housing so we can effectively end homelessness. And Connecticut was actually, I think, the first state in the union that ended chronic homelessness for veterans back in 2015, and we're looking to end it for chronic homelessness in general at the end of last year. They almost made it. They had a plan for the few that were left to get them housed. And again, we're just trying to preserve that right now and continue to build on that. Some of the other things that we're interested in is certainly strengthen the services for children and youth. We talked a lot about getting into the school systems. That's not that's actually very purposeful, because not only can you affect societal change by getting the awareness at an earlier age, but think about it. If you can help someone when they're just starting to get sick and avoid having to go into the hospital, avoid being psychotic, you can not only avoid a lot of turmoil and bad things for the individual, but
And
you can
debt.
also avoid a lot of costs.
Yes.
Even for the state.
Yes.
Well, exactly.
Right.
So
And-
again,
or
this
for
makes
you.
Yes.
a
Right.
lot of sense from a fiscal perspective, let alone, obviously it makes a lot of sense for the
Yes.
individual.
Yes.
So that's certainly part of what we focus on. We certainly focus on protecting civil rights. Believe it or not, there has been legislation, at least in the last several years when I've been paying attention. It seems like every session there'll be some legislator that will want to pitch some not well thought out bill that wants to restrict or infringe upon the rights of people with a mental health condition. And whenever that surfaces, we put the call out through our public policy committee. We put out action alerts. We rally the troops. We're a member of another coalition that's very active in advocacy, and we bring folks out and we do testimony at public hearings, and we do let people know that, hey, this bill is not really fair to the people involved. You don't discriminate against folks with a mental health condition. It's not right. In fact, it's a clear violation in a lot of cases of the American with Disabilities Act, which,
Right.
again, legislators, if they haven't been educated, don't understand that. So we've been very effective in doing that.
We're
over
very
the years.
lucky to have Chris Murphy and
Oh, yes.
Senator Kennedy Jr., Ted Kennedy Jr., who are very active.
Rosa DeLauro.
Rosa
Yeah.
DeLauro, who all have worked very hard to keep the legislation that we
yes.
have.
Yes, tirelessly.
Yeah.
You know,
And
and
people in Washington.
yeah,
as
oh
well.
yeah, no, we've got a lot of different
Other
advocates
people
out there.
Yeah.
And just to finalize what kind of is on our radar, certainly, you know, we promote education, employment, wellness. We're always looking to improve equity, you know, mental health parity. It's actually was passed in Connecticut before it was passed on the federal level, but the reality is the statutes were written in such a way that the definitions were kind of vague, and the insurance companies
That's
have
what
played
Ted
kind
did.
of fast and loose with the rules on that, so that someone who has, say, cancer or diabetes will get certain amounts of services at a certain level that are not in line with what someone with a mental health condition will get. So there really isn't any true parity yet, and we've been very active on trying to firm up the regulations, firm up the oversight, so that parity is actually not just a law, but it's actual fact, that it really
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah.
And that we're not there yet, but
Yeah.
we're working on it.
Well, that was
That's a
a
great
bill
thing to
that
work on.
Ted Kennedy worked on, that parity law, and I thought it passed, but I guess not.
So we're going to be wrapping up shortly.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask if you have any final thoughts before,
Final thoughts.
final things you want to share, any way that you can tell our audience how they can volunteer,
Oh, yeah.
how they can
Oh,
assist
sure.
in some way, whether they have someone in their family or not.
Yeah.
Well, Nami as an organization is very much a volunteer-driven organization. We have paid staff up at the state office, but all of the 10 local affiliates that are scattered throughout the state are all run by volunteers. So if this sounds like something you're interested in, by all means, call up Nami Shoreline, or if you're not in this area, you want to call up the state office, we'll hook you up with a local affiliate in your area. We're always looking for volunteers. Obviously, we're always looking for donations, and
Yes.
we would love to take advantage of any skills that you have, you know, whether you want to, facilitate a support group, teach a class, you know, testify up at the legislative office building during a public hearing, whatever it is, we'll put you to work.
Yeah.
And I also have another question about if someone wants to participate in your groups, this is something we didn't talk about earlier, is it confidential?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we say in the
Indeed.
support groups, what we say here stays here.
Yes.
So yes, we
Okay.
very much.
I'm sure that's a concern for
yeah,
some.
no,
Absolutely, and some people come in not wanting to share at all, they're just listening, and by the end, they're sharing. Because there's something about hearing others that makes you say, oh my God, I'm not alone.
like it says on the shirt, you're not alone.
I'm not
Right, right.
alone. And
Right.
it gives you the courage, yeah.
Right.
And it feels so good. That's so important, not only for your loved one, but for you. The self-care that you
yes.
talked about, Sarah, really important to take care of yourself. Let yourself go out once in a while with a friend so that you can rejuvenate. And definitely call, just if you want to come to a support group. And that's a good way to learn about what NAMI does, you know.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for speaking today and sharing with me your views and what your experiences have been. It's been very helpful to me, so I hope it's been helpful to our audience.
Yeah, me too.
Happy
So-
to do
For
it.
helping
Yes.
Yes,
And you
Thank
might be
you.
wondering why I think it's important and why this
Yes,
is
why,
important to me. Because my show is called In This Together, and I really believe that we're all in this together on this planet. We all belong to each other. We all interact with each other every single day, and it's really important for all of us to open our minds and our hearts so that we can connect with each other and move past some of the stigmas and old belief systems and old paradigm ways of doing things. I feel like if we don't do that, we're really doing disservice to ourselves as well as others on this planet. It's not just, we're not alone, and we have to interact with everyone here.
Yes.
So I think it's really important that we see a new and better way to support and educate and help one another. There's so many programs and support groups available to residents in Connecticut. We don't know they exist.
Yes.
And so NAMI is one that I heard about a few years ago, but I didn't know about them before that. And I think it's really important that people here on the Shoreline know how to access this information, know how to reach out to you if they need to. So the best way to do it is going to NamiShoreline.org.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
correct?
For the
For all the
Shoreline.
programs, anything
But
they need
there
to
are
access?
programs that we don't have, and if you feel like driving 40 minutes, there are people who came to our family to family who came for 45 minutes away, 50 minutes
right.
away.
Wow.
So
We've had people from out of state.
out of
Right.
state, I've had that for my collaborative
Right.
problem solving. They came from New York.
Wow.
So-
Now, do they have an organization in New York too, correct?
Oh, yeah, there's a
Oh,
Nami
yes.
in every 50
Every
states.
state.
Every state.
Okay, I'm
Right.
just thinking, because if this gets shared elsewhere, maybe someone could
Oh,
find
that'd
out
be
more.
wonderful.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
NamiShoreline.org and NamiConnecticut.org.
Yeah,
Yes.
NamiCT.org.
Or
Right.
just
No,
Google
Nami
it.
CT.
And is
You know,
the
Clicks away.
national one NAMI.org?
Yep, NAMI.org is the national
Because
organization.
this
Good,
show will
yes.
be shown on the TV, but will also go up on YouTube, so it could be shared
Great. That's
for
wonderful.
other people
Wonderful,
to
I
view
appreciate
from
that.
other locations as well.
Yeah, the more, we do have to work on our marketing. We'll talk about that.
So I say to my audience, please support this group in any way that you can, whether it is by getting educated yourself or referring someone you know that may benefit from one or more of their services, or if you can donate or volunteer to help them, that would be great as well. So thank you everyone for being here today. I appreciate it. Thank
we
you
enjoyed
everyone
it.
for watching.
We are in this together.